Hey everybody, welcome back to FM. In part 2 of our NC Turbo installation series, we're going to cover the installation of the oil supply line, and we're going to do some turbo prep work and get the turbo installed in the car. All right, our first step in the assembly process is to install our oil supply kit. Now, most of the work is going to be done underneath the car, and unfortunately it's in an area that's fairly difficult to show what's going on. So later on we will show all of this on a standalone engine. But for now I will do my best to kind of point where things are at and try to give you the best view possible. So with that said, we're going to start back here and we're going to remove our oil pressure sensor. So right now this harness is in the way, and it's currently clipped to the transmission. So I'm going to first unclip that to get access to the sensor behind it. All right, the sensor is with the green plug up there, so we'll unplug it first. All right, it's unplugged. Now to remove the oil pressure sensor, we want to use a 24mm socket. Now, most impact grade sockets are going to be too thick, so we highly recommend using a thin wall chrome socket for this. Now using a 24mm deep socket or a wrench, we're going to remove the oil pressure sensor. Be ready to catch any oil that might come out. There it is. Okay, yep, there's a little oil. Now with our oil pressure sensor removed, we need to now install our T-fitting, which unfortunately can't be installed as is because the leg of the T will contact the bell housing. So we need to pull away our oil filter block away from the engine block. So we'll loosen the 4 bolts that secure it. There's 2 in front of the oil filter and 2 behind. If we just loosen those bolts, we can slide the housing away, which will allow us to install our T-fitting. Now, while we have it slid away, we want to take a peek at the gasket that sits between the 2 pieces. It is a coated gasket. So if you notice bare metal, shiny metal, that means the coating has started to flake away, and you're going to want to end up pulling that all the way off so you could replace the gasket with the one we provide. If not, you're okay to put everything back together, but still be diligent to check for leaks and replace the gasket if necessary. All right, since this is all very difficult to see within the car, we wanted to take you over to the display engine so we could show you what the oil filter block looks like. So here's the oil filter block, and here are the 4 bolts that hold it in place. Now, this does have the optional factory oil cooler, so we won't be able to fully remove that block. Not that we necessarily need to, but we're just wanting to pull the block out so we can thread in our T-fitting for our oil pressure sensor and oil supply. So using a 10mm socket, we will just back those bolts out. That loosens the housing. So now we can pull the block away from the engine block, and that provides us sufficient space to thread in our oil supply T. So with that said, we'll get started. All right, now we're going to do some assembly at the bench. So we're going to assemble our oil pressure sensor into our T-fitting, and we're going to use high temperature thread sealant. We do not recommend using tape. So we're going to take our oil pressure sensor, So this is about how much you need, what it should look like. So we are lacking on the first couple threads because we don't want it to be ingested into the oil system. So we just have it on the next 4 or 5 threads. Now we'll thread it in hand tight into our T. Now we'll also apply some paste to our male threads of our T. All right, now we're ready to install our T-fitting into our block. Now we can use a 13mm wrench on these 2 flats to help us turn it. We want to go hand tight with the T. We want to go 1 additional full revolution. Then we want to end up with the leg of the T horizontal when viewing it from the back. So at least 1 full revolution, then horizontal. So we'll do that now. So we are actually about 1 full revolution. You know, we're hand tight now. We're almost horizontal. So we'll go 1 more full revolution with a wrench, but end up with this horizontal. Okay, there we are. Now we can resecure the oil filter block back to the engine block. So I'll do that with our 10mm socket, starting with the rear 2 bolts. Once you have all 4 bolts snugged down, you'll want to torque these to 15 to 22 pound-feet. Now that we have our oil filter block reattached to the engine block, we can now finish clocking our T-fitting. We want the leg of the T to be pointed at approximately 10 o'clock when viewed from behind. Now we're ready to torque down our oil pressure sensor. So the torque spec is 9 to 13 pound-feet. Again, we recommend using a chrome socket because most impact sockets don't work. This one does. We also want to use a 13mm wrench to hold the fitting stationary, the T-fitting, as we torque down the sensor. So now we need to plug our oil pressure sensor in. Now you'll notice the plug will not quite reach and we don't want to tug on the wire. So if you follow the wire where it goes into the harness, you'll see a stretch of tape. If you cut that tape, that allows the wire to come out of the harness just a little bit and it gives us about 1 inch more of slack. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, I can plug it in. Okay, no problem. So we've applied Teflon paste to our dash 4 adapter fitting, which we'll install into the T. So we will go ahead and tighten it down with a 9/16 wrench. We want to install it hand tight and then tighten it another turn to turn and a half. That's a turn and a half. Now we need to install our oil supply line, which is a stainless steel braided line. Stainless steel is fairly abrasive and we don't want it rubbing on things behind the engine. So we include this rubber hose to act as a buffer. However, this rubber hose isn't split. So the trick I use to split this hose, to get you a fresh razor blade, pinch one end of the hose in a vise and carefully cut down the length of the hose. Once you get closer to yourself, move your hand to the other side. So if it slips, you don't cut yourself. Okay, we'll just confirm we got deep enough all the way. Now we'll apply our split hose to our AN line. We're going to start just at one end. And then to ensure it doesn't fall off, we have 4 zip ties here. Now when we go to install this in the car, you notice the rubber's justified toward one end. We will want that end to be what goes down to our fitting at the oil filter. This end isn't covered because it will eventually be P-clamped in place, so we don't have to worry about it chafing on anything. Both ends are the same. All right, now we're ready to install our line. So we're going to drop it down on the driver's side here, and we're going to want to meet up with our T-fitting as best as possible. You want to be on the outside of the lower radiator hose. You might kind of have to twist and turn it to get it to drop down. And that's probably all the farther it needs to go. And we'll just lay the rest over to the passenger side, because that's where we'll eventually hook up to the turbo. Now we'll connect it at the bottom. And then before we connect it to the top, we'll double check our routing and make sure that everything is free of chafe and in a good position. Now that we're back under the car, we can see our oil line has fallen almost where we need it. So we'll add a drop of oil here, then we'll attach the line to this fitting and tighten it down using a 9/16 wrench. Okay, so I got a drop of oil on my finger. We'll add it to that sealing surface. Take our line. Should be all right. Okay, so we're snug, and then we'll use a wrench to tighten it fully. I think we're good right there. Okay. So after I got the line installed, it was doing a pretty sharp bend to clear. So I decided to bump the angle of the T-fitting up just a little ways, so we're closer to 11 o'clock. We just want to make sure that our line isn't too close to our harness. So now that we've finished our oil portion of everything down low here, I'm going to go ahead and clean up the mess that I made from opening things up where oil has dripped. So we got some brake clean and some cloths, and we'll get it cleaned up. Okay. Now the next step in our process is to mount the manifold and the turbo. But before we get to that, we need to first install the first portions of our water supply line. So on the back side of the block here, there's a fitting that we're going to remove, and that is going to be the source for our turbo water supply. So using a 14mm Allen wrench, we're going to remove that plug. Now, a lot of times those require a breaker bar to remove, so be prepared for a little bit of a fight. This one's already broken loose, so I'll remove it with a regular ratchet. I forgot to mention that this will likely make a very big mess, so be prepared with a drain pan underneath the engine. So now we're going to take our supplied fitting from the turbo water supply kit. Well, looks like this. And we're going to add some Teflon paste to the threads before we install it. And the size of the hex is a 19, so you can use either a deep socket or a wrench. The threads are tapered, so you want to just go till you get it fairly snug. Now we're going to install our turbo water supply line. Now I have taken our turbo water supply kit, and off of the long section of 5/16 hose, I've cut off 24 inches of hose, and off of the heat sleeve, I cut off 24 inches of heat sleeve. I also need one clamp. So we're going to feed heat sleeve over the hose. So you kind of have to just push and pull, kind of inchworm it on. Basically get it on as much as you can. We'll then slip our clamp onto the one end. Might pull back our heat sleeve a little bit. And we'll now install this onto the fitting we just installed. And we'll use a 7mm socket to tighten up the clamp. And then make sure and slide the heat sleeve to cover it as much as possible. And then take this line, route it underneath the brake lines for now. We're going to take our high temperature P-clamp, also from the turbo water supply kit. We're going to route the line up and over the stud, install our P-clamp. We want it roughly horizontal. We're going to take the stock nut that originally secured the heat shield to the stud and secure our P-clamp. We'll tighten it down with a 10mm socket. So you'll notice I kind of have it coming out and then up. We want to give some clearance here because the manifold will end up sitting here. So we want to keep some distance between the two pieces. Okay, this will connect to the turbo later on. Now we're going to prep our manifold before we install it. So we're going to install the 4 studs for the turbine flange. So using the studs provided in the manifold kit, we're going to install them, and we're going to take the 2 M8 nuts and we're going to use them as jam nuts. And so we're going to start the stud, install the 2 nuts, take 2 13mm wrenches, tighten the nuts against each other, Then we can install the stud into the turbine. We want to get it approximately 16 pound-feet. Take our 2 wrenches. And do it again for the other 3 studs. Now take these nuts and set them aside because we're going to need to use them again when we install the studs into the turbine housing. We'll leave this hardware off for now until we're ready to install the turbo to the manifold. But first we're going to install the manifold into the car. Prior to installing our new manifold, we'll install our new gasket. Now we're ready to install our manifold. So we've installed the 3 top nuts. The bottom nuts are hard to get to with this manifold design, so we're actually going to get to those from the bottom. So we're underneath now, and now we're going to install the 4 lower manifold nuts. So now we have all the nuts on and we have them all snug. So now we need to go through and do our final torquing. Now this manifold is a split manifold design, and technically in Mazda's documentation I could not find a specific torque pattern. That said, we're going to follow the general principle of torquing from the center of the manifold and working our way outward. I'm going to start with the center lower nut here, torque it. I'm going to then go across the top row, back up top. We'll come back down below and torque the rest of the bottoms. Now getting a torque wrench in here is pretty challenging, so you're going to see me tighten it with a standard socket. We're using a 15mm socket and torquing it down to between 32 and 47 pound-feet. Now we'll go to the top. Now that we're back up top, we will tighten our top nuts, starting with the middle and working our way outward. Now we will go back down below, tighten our remaining nuts going in to out. Now we're back to the bench for a little bit more assembly. Similar to the manifold, we need to install some studs into our turbine housing. So we're going to follow the same procedure. We're going to just install the 5 studs into the housing here. So make sure you have your jam nuts mentioned earlier. And we're aiming for the same approximate torque spec of roughly 16 pound-feet. Now that we've installed the studs, we'll continue on assembling the turbo. We will then take our oil supply fitting out of the turbo box, and we'll notice on the bottom side it has an inverted flare. That matches up with the flare in the center housing of the turbo. We want to add a drop of oil onto that surface and then install this fitting using a 9/16 socket. And we want to make sure we don't over tighten this fitting. We really just want to tighten it until it's snug. Now we're ready to continue on assembling our turbo. Now I do want to mention the turbos come pre-clocked. So the turbine housing, compressor housing, and center section all come properly aligned to each other. With that said, we can now install the oil drain. Now the oil drain tube, gasket, bolts, and washers come from the oil drain kit. We want to install the drain tube with the orientation of the bow in the tube facing the manifold flange. With the hardware started, we can now get them tightened down with a 13mm socket. And we don't have a torque spec for these, so you want to just make sure they're nice and snug without going crazy. Now that we've installed the oil drain tube, we can now move on to the wastegate. Now where these two loose bolts are, that's where the stock wastegate bracket was, and it was removed when the turbo was clocked. So we're going to fully remove these two loose bolts. We're going to replace them with these slightly longer bolts that were included with the turbo box. And we're also going to install the wastegate bracket. So we're going to remove them using either a 1/2 inch or 13mm socket. Now these two bolts we just removed, they are no longer needed, so they can be tossed. So we're going to take our new wastegate bracket. We're going to orient it as shown and install our longer bolts. Now we're going to just get them lightly tight for now because we may want to adjust the wastegate bracket slightly later on. So we should have them loose enough to be able to adjust it. All right, here we are in the future a little bit. Now we have changed the process just slightly on how to set up the wastegate, so this set of instructions will help cover that. So as you can see, we have our turbo here, and we are ready to install and adjust our wastegate. Now before we actually get started installing and adjusting our wastegate actuator, we need to first remove our clip. Now these little clips for the rod end come pre-installed on the turbo, and when removing them, they are spring-loaded, so they will want to shoot across the room, so you need to take some care. So I usually take a little pick, and I take a magnet, use the pick to pry it out and the magnet to keep it from flying. So where we left off is we have our bracket on, and it's loose enough to be adjustable. We have our wastegate actuator and the rod end, so we're going to go ahead and get that threaded on just to start. So we'll take our actuator and the hardware that comes with it, and we'll install it onto our bracket. We'll go ahead and get those tight. Okay. All right, now that our actuator is in place, we need to adjust the rod end. Now there's a couple considerations on how to get this lined up properly. So first, we need to make sure there's a little kink in the rod, and that's going to dictate how high the rod end is relative to the wastegate arm. So if we have it bent way down, you can see it kind of passes below. And if we have it bent way up, we're way too high. So we want to try to get the flange of the rod end parallel and close to the flange of the wastegate arm. So about there looks pretty good. The next adjustment we want to make is to have the alignment of the wastegate rod get pretty close to the alignment of the pin. And that's going to be adjusted by the slots in our bracket. So you can see here, that's pretty close to lined up. Doesn't have to be perfect. One thing we are aiming for is we do want the rod to come out of the can as centered as possible. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to make sure that it's not offset on one side or the other. So I think this position's pretty good. So we'll take our 13mm tool and tighten up our wastegate bracket. And now our final adjustment is the wastegate rod end length. So this is going to be adjusted as you drive the car because we need to make sure we're dialing in the proper amount of boost. So on the bench, we're going to set the baseline boost. Now that is going to be 2mm of preload. Let me explain what I mean by that. I've taken the rod end back off so I can demonstrate. So 0 preload means that the alignment of the pin and the hole is perfect. And what we want to do is we want to add a little bit of pull to it. So we want to pull the rod away from the center of the pin. And we want to do that by 2mm. So in other words, we should have about 2mm of hole exposed. Another way to put it is this is a 1mm thread pitch. So if you start with your rod on the pin with no preload, all you have to do is 2 full revolutions, and that will get you your 2mm. So we'll go ahead and get that set now. All right, so once you have your alignment good, let's go ahead and get the rod pulled over the pin. So give it a little bit of a tug. We'll take our clip that we removed earlier, snap it into place. Okay, and the final step of our actuator install and adjustment process is to tighten our jam nut. We're going to use an 11mm wrench. Now our wastegate rod end setting, that is a good starting point for dialing in our boost. Now after the car is driven, we'll evaluate where the boost actually is, and we may need to make adjustments to this rod. But this is our starting point for now. All right, that concludes our update, so we'll send you back to the regular program. Now we're ready to install the inboard water line on the turbo. So that is the water line that is tubular and it has a banjo fitting. And it's going to install on the center section opposite of the wastegate. So the banjo fitting and the 2 crush washers, those are going to be included in the water line kit. The banjo fitting will be a part of the turbo box. So we'll load 1 crush washer onto the banjo, feed it through this side of the fitting, crush washer on the other side. Now our goal with alignment on here is we want the outlet of the pipe to be roughly parallel to the turbine flange. Doesn't need to be perfect, but once we get it where we want it, we'll tighten this down with a 19mm socket. So our turbo is ready to go in, almost. The turbo is ready, but we need to do a few things on the chassis to make sure we have the sufficient room for the turbo. Now, different NCs seem to have their AC lines all over the place. This one actually looks okay. Basically what we're doing is making sure that this AC line isn't up over in this area, because our wastegate is going to end up right above these brake lines. So make sure your AC line is outboard of these ABS lines as it is right now. I didn't have to manipulate this one. Another thing we need to check before we put the turbo in and we run out of space is you can see this brake line down here is really close to the manifold. Number one, this engine's gonna rock some, so we don't want that to contact. Number two, this manifold is hot. We don't want it to transfer heat to it. So we're going to bend that line. We're gonna try to get as much clearance as possible, but we don't want it up against any kind of metal edge. So I'm gonna do all the tweaks with my hands to try to pull that line forward and outboard so it's as far away from the manifold as we can get it. All right, that's quite a bit better than it was before. Also, before we put the turbo on, let's just double check our water supply line clearance. You can see here we have a little over an inch of clearance between the number 4 runner and the water line. And that's about as good as we're gonna get because we're up against the firewall here. So make sure you're looking similar to that. If not, maybe loosen this P-clamp, give it a little bit more slack to gain some clearance. And the last step is we can do some of it now and we'll end up doing more later, but these brake lines will end up pretty close to the turbo. All of these brake lines. So we can go ahead and start tweaking them as well. And I'm gonna do this without tools. You don't wanna use tools to potentially kink anything. But we're gonna just gently grab onto the lines and a few at a time, just give them some tugs to pull them away from the turbo a little bit. Just for some extra clearance. May not look like much, but that is quite a bit more room than we had before. All right, it's all the time you've been waiting for. Time to put the turbo in. So there's a little strategy to this because the oil drain line makes it a little complicated because we have to snake it down between the alternator and the manifold. So we're gonna kind of start with that in mind. You have to manipulate the turbo a little bit, so I'm gonna have it angled this way. Feed the line down, and as it goes down between, I'll just slowly rotate the turbo into position over the studs, drop it into place. Now, like all of our turbo kits, you probably noticed I did not put a gasket between the manifold and the turbine. That's intentional. We do not run gaskets there because we know gaskets there will fail, and then you're gonna have to replace it and replace it and replace it. So we don't run gasket. Now our turbo went in okay. If you're having struggles getting your turbo into place, you can do the same trick we did earlier where we put the jack underneath the oil pan. Make sure you use a block of wood or something soft to distribute the load. And you can jack up the engine on the passenger side, approximately that 1 inch. That can help a little bit with getting the turbo into place. Now that the turbo is in place, we need to secure it. So per stud, we're gonna include a Nord lock washer. We're gonna do a locking nut, and we're gonna secure those with some combination of 13mm wrench or socket. You'll definitely want a 13mm stubby, as the inboard rear nut is fairly challenging to get. Definitely leave each nut loose until you have all nuts started. You need the flexibility of being able to lift up on the turbo a little bit. They are now all started, so we can start to get them tight.
Okay, good and tight.
All right, now that our turbo hardware is installed, we can now install our outboard waterline fitting, which would otherwise cover up that hardware. So it's this fitting here. It's included with the water supply line kit. Don't forget the 14mm crush washer, also included in that water supply line kit. And we'll tighten it down. This hex is a 19mm, or you can use a 3/4 inch. One of the last steps of installing our turbo is to hook up the turbo oil supply line. Now we're going to install our 90-degree fitting first, get that tightened down, and then we'll hook up our line, but we're not going to tighten it quite yet. We'll wait until we have it fully secured with P-clamps. So get yourself a drop of oil. We're going to add a drop of oil to this conical surface, since it's a sealing surface. We'll install our 90-degree fitting. We're going to tighten that with a 9/16 wrench. And as far as angle, you want it to be roughly parallel to this portion of your water line. So that what might be a 10-degree angle from the center line of the turbo. Now we'll take another drop of oil. Again, we've got a sealing surface here, so we'll add oil to it. And we'll route our oil supply line. And we're gonna just get it finger tight for now. Now let's finish our turbo oil drain. So I have the oil drain hose preloaded with a clamp. These parts coming from the oil drain kit. Now this hose is a little snug on the drain pipe, which is a good thing, but to make it a little easier to go on, I did add a drop of oil to the inner diameter of the hose. So we'll get it up in place, tighten this clamp with a 7mm socket. All right, now let's install the heat sleeve. So we're gonna just slip it up the end of the hose, all the way up and over the clamp, as we wanna protect all the rubber. And the clamp inside of the sleeve is usually enough to hold it in place. You can also add a zip tie at the bottom if you'd like, a zip tie pulled from our miscellaneous bag kit. But yeah, it's tight on that clamp. So we'd previously drained the oil, but of course we put the plug back in and it's gonna have filled up again. So we're ready to catch what comes out. We're gonna replace the drain plug with an AN adapter fitting. Now we have our AN adapter fitting preloaded with a 14mm crush washer, both pieces from our oil drain kit. We're going to install it into the oil pan, tighten it down with a 13/16 socket, and torque it to 20 pound-feet. All right, I'll go over the next several steps all at once here. So we have our 90-degree fitting, which we'll loosely install onto the AN adapter fitting we just installed. We will then take our overly long drain hose, we will cut it to length to fit onto this fitting. We'll attach it with the supplied clamp. We will then finish torquing this down. So we already have oil dripping on the mating surface, so we don't need to worry about adding anything new. So So before I make my cut, I'm gonna kind of watch the line and make sure it's not up against anything here. And once I'm satisfied with its position, I'll mark my cut and make the cut. Okay, that's on, and now we'll tighten our clamp. Okay. Now that our line is complete, we'll final tight this fitting. So the collar here for the AN line is a 7/8. We also need to make sure our oil pan fitting doesn't spin, so for that we need a 13/16. All right, that does it for video 2 of our NC Turbo installation series. As you can see, we have a nice shiny turbo in the engine bay now. So we hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions over anything you've seen in this video, please reach out to our customer support team. They'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all those things. And be sure to join us for video 3, where we're gonna install the outlet casting and we're gonna weld the cat into the downpipe. So we'll see you then.